for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. The word of the Lord.
Thank you, God.
Well, like Skipper, I've been thinking about where I was 10 years ago this morning. You probably have been too. As I'd done for the previous 3 months, was walking into Central United Methodist Church in Florence, where I'd been newly appointed as the associate pastor there. And as I did, around 9 o'clock most mornings, weekday mornings, I greeted the receptionist, Greta, whose reply to me was, "A plane has flown into the World Trade Center. It's terrorists." And my immediate thought was, she's just turned an unimaginably bad thing into something hysterical. She is the wife of a law enforcement person, and I think she has this imagination, having been around some of that sometimes makes her a little bit hysterical about things. She can imagine the absolute worst case scenario. So I just thought Greta was being a little bit histrionic. So I went to my office, sad that a tragic accident had happened. And then she yells out a few minutes later, "The second plane is hit." And that's when I knew or felt that the world had shifted. That she was not just being overly anxious. She was probably right. I remember going home, working through that day kind of numb, and going home and waking up the next morning preparing to go to work. And like it was a regular day, going on into work. Those memories get kind of seared into our mind. My mother recalls that she was sewing the American flag on my Boy Scout uniform the day the Challenger exploded. That's a direct connection she has in her mind. Many people can recall exactly what they were doing and where they were when they heard that President Kennedy had been shot, when they heard that Dr. King had been shot. They immediately can be taken back to that moment. Those tragic events can just lock themselves into our minds so that we know where we were 10 years ago today. That September 12th morning reminded me of the morning after Hurricane Hugo. Both times, the environment didn't match the feeling. On the day after Hugo, we went out to our yard to start recovering it, and it was so pretty. The yard was a mess, but the day was pretty. The skies were clear blue like today, and the temperature was right, and there was low humidity. It felt weird, it felt wrong. So did September 12th. It felt wrong to be walking in business as usual on a beautiful day when everywhere else the hearts and in many places the bodies were turned towards D.C. and Pennsylvania and New York. It all seemed weird. I guess what makes 9/11 even more difficult than maybe the assassinations is sort of what feels behind it. An assassination, as horrible as that is, seems to be directed at a particular person, or at least an ideal. 9/11, like December 7th, 1941, felt like an attack not just on a person, but on a nation, on all of us, on who we were, who we are. Attacked by misguided people who thought they could change the direction of who we were by killing innocent people. Ever since that day, our nation has been on alert. And most of those days since 9/11, we've been at war. Which has caused for people of faith questions. Questions about the use of lethal force. Questions about the legitimacy of what it means to go to war and what causes us to go to war. We've suffered with high costs. The highest cost being lives that have been lost in response to 9/11. The high cost of a lost sense of security. The high cost of resources, real money that has been lost in this. We've also experienced unity in a different way. We remember well that those days, those months after 9/11, people were a little more neighborly. We felt a sense that we were one nation, indivisible. So there was no rush to knock somebody out of the way to get ahead of them in the grocery store line. We were fellow Americans in a time of grief, wanting the best for one another. Citizens again, if only temporary. Flags flew on cars for months. A renewed sense of community in our nation. We remember the first responders that were honored and have been honored since, but especially honored that fall at the World Series, where New York City firefighters and policemen became the honorary men on the field. Our consciousness was raised about their risk, the willingness they have to risk their lives for the sake of perfect strangers because of a job they had to do. Our consciousness was raised about soldiers who have the same risk and willingly do it on behalf of people they will likely never know. There's an iconic image of victim 0001 being carried out of the World Trade Center. His name was Michael Judge. He was a Franciscan priest and the chaplain for the New York City Fire Department. And when he heard that the firemen were in there, he rushed into the World Trade Center. He was killed administering last rites to a fallen firefighter. So in that image, you see 6 firemen carrying him out. They're covered with ash, carrying out the lifeless body of a Franciscan priest who rushed in alongside firefighters and police officers and other noble persons to help bring out who they could. Brother Judge said in an interview that was discovered after his death, "You wonder what your last hour of life could be. Will I be doing something for someone, trying to save a life?" "343 other New York City firefighters were killed. They've had funerals since. Many others died trying to help another." So while 9/11 serves as a reminder that misguided people will attack, I think it also serves as a reminder that noble, faithful people will respond, will protect, will do what they can to bring protection and healing and comfort into lives that are hurting. In those months following 9/11, we watched the news, we read the magazines, we read the paper. Those images continued to go across our lives, and we naturally became angry. When you're hit, it is natural to want to hit back. When you're grieving, it is natural to become angry. It's part of the process. When you're taunted, it's tempting to want to retaliate. The followers of Christ were forced to deal with some tough teachings. We had to grapple with the Lord who said, pray for those who persecute us. Forgive our enemies. Not long after 9/11, I met a man by the name of Gully, Philip Gully. He's a Quaker minister. Quakers, you may know, are what we call a peace church. They've been pacifists for 350 years. They have determined that it is faithful to their reading of the Scripture, their reading about Jesus' commands, to never use force in response. Gully said he was amazed in those early days after 9/11 how hard it was to convince people, Quakers, not to use force. 350 years of tradition for them to never use force to respond was almost lost in the balance of fear, the pain of 9/11. We've had moments since then where we've had to continue, people of faith, people of Christian faith, have continued to wonder what is the right response. We wondered that just this year when Osama bin Laden was killed. How should we feel? How should we react to news we've, in many ways, been wanting and hoping for 10 years? We wondered as we read that news and dealt with our own conflicting emotions how Jesus might respond to such news. Surely that has to be a factor in how we assess the news we just received. One of the questions we've had to ask, and we will always have to ask, is how do you pursue justice in light of our command to love, forgive, make peace? It's especially difficult to weigh that out when you're angry. Maybe even more so when you're afraid. When we're afraid, we have a hard time knowing how we should respond. What I want for us is a response like Christ. But I know that's always a challenge. I have people who, in my life, who live constantly in the fear of the next attack. I don't mean with the fear like it's in their sort of knowledge that an attack may happen. I mean they live in it. They constantly are aware of the next threat level warning. They heard about the most recent foiled plot and joined the 24-hour news cycle imagining what the next one might be. They live in that fear. I ache for them. In a way that I ache for those who are awaiting the pathology report. In a way I ache for those who are afraid of that late night phone call. I want for them what I want for us. The gift of Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is a stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and foes, they shall stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise up against me, yet will I be confident.